Hi, I'm Monique Woodard from BlackFounders. We're here at the Ideas Are Worthless conference in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm here with Howard Franklin. We just finished the media panel talking about how to get startups more media attention. You are the founder of iRun Campaigns. You can be found on Twitter at iRun Campaigns. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you can help people get more media exposure?
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity. A lot of what I do is actually running campaigns. Go figure. I work mostly in the public sector, so many of my clients are nonprofit organizations that want to have an impact on the legislative process, bill making, elected officials and both candidates who are running for elected office, who want bigger footprints in their earned media or just bigger footprints from a leadership standpoint, and then also local government from school boards, cities, county commissions, and the state legislature. So a lot of really what I do is help these organizations figure out what pieces they need to move their agendas forward, whether it's stopping and starting legislation, whether it is running for an elected office, whether it is elevating an issue into the public mindset or the mind frame so they can be talked about and debated and eventually legislated upon.
Let's talk a little bit about social media, because social media has played a huge part in the political process this election season. What can startups take away from what politicians have done in social media and use in their own businesses?
Well, and I'm glad you asked me that question, partially because I also worked in the startup arena before falling into politics, and I think there's a lot of similarity. Startups oftentimes are really on a sprint. They decide, we've got this awesome product, we have to bring it to market, we've got to let as many people as possible know about it very, very quickly. Campaigns are very, very similar. We build an organization organically but very quickly, and we have generally a short timeline. Most campaigns start within a year of the election. So I think that the similarities also inform the best ways to use those things. One of the most important parts of a political campaign and a startup is finding the right people to move a vision forward. If that is individual validators, which are terribly important in politics and as well as a lot of the tech business we talk about, if that includes funders, for instance, which are also terribly important in campaigns. President Barack Obama, I think, really showed campaigns in the political world the way when he was able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars through small donations via the internet, via email, via social media. And I can tell you that the political world is very enamored with social media right now. So everybody's trying everything that President Obama was able to do in 2008. So a lot of the similarities, really for ramping up quickly and finding folks that are otherwise very difficult to find, and then finding ways to monetize resources and relationships. Okay.
You spoke very briefly about relationships, but how do you cultivate those relationships in an online environment?
I think it's really just about engagement. And, this is probably a really good tenet to live by no matter what, but I think especially true when you don't have the proximity and the context of a personal face-to-face relationship. You have to convince and be convincing that you're really willing to engage in a relationship that is mutually beneficial. So when we meet one another face to face and I ask for something, you can at least look at me and decide, hey, this person is credible, this person is going to return this favor, those sorts of things. But in the social media world, I think the first thing you have to do is to try to give. I think a lot of that comes down to actual and genuine engagement. So, I think when I first started on social media, Twitter in particular, I found it interesting for reading stuff, but I didn't really find the need for the engagement. Like I was happy to read what I did and not necessarily thank the person who posted it or retweet it out to the network I was building. And I think the more that I became engaged in that, the more useful the network has become for me.
How do you cultivate a social media campaign? Should every startup be on every social media platform? Are there places that someone definitely needs to be if they're in certain industries?
Like any question about communications, you start with the audience, and you want to go to where the people that you want to talk to already happen to be. It's very difficult to get them to come to a platform to listen to what you have to say. So I would say my de facto answer, and this is true of politics, the traditional rule, the rule of thumb is that you really only want to be in the networks where you can dominate. And not dominate necessarily by having more Twitter followers than, say, Justin Bieber, but at least having more than your opponents have or that the folks who are in your space happen to have. So, Twitter is one of those things, in my opinion, that there's probably a long tail technology. It's not something you can just jump into and 3 months later it'll be paying dividends. Whereas Facebook, I think, is much easier for folks to engage. It's a bigger network, gives you a little more space to share, and I think it's also a little better built for multimedia. I would say most every campaign ought to be on Facebook. Most every candidate ought to be on LinkedIn. And I think you have to decide, based on how much time you have and whether or not the people you really want to reach, and it's really dissecting that audience. It might be your voters, who oftentimes are going to be difficult to find and, diverse, very disparate in terms of finding them in your district. But it might be a question of finding the influencers in your race. Who are the party officials, the other elected officials, the other politicians, the folks who influence policy, who can say this is a strong candidate, they're doing the right things and a great job, and you ought to support them. So I think those are the folks I look for on Twitter.
Okay, give me 3 tips for rules of engagement. We've seen, for instance, the Twitter at Sweden have some issues. We've seen other political leaders get in a little bit of trouble on Facebook or Twitter, especially. Can you give us some rules of engagement for startups?
Absolutely. First rule: everything is permanent. So if you're not sure if you put it out there, if you're not sure you'd want someone to ever see it, then you shouldn't put it on social media. And in fact, not only is it all permanent on social media, but most of the networks require in their terms of service that they own whatever you put on the network. So not only is it there, but it's not yours to control. Certainly, rule number 1, I think, when most of the big snafus we've seen have come from the lack of realization that they can no longer control what's out there on the internet. I also think you need to be very genuine. And I know that probably sounds like a platitude, but if you get onto any of these social media networks with explicitly and only the ideas about what you can get from that interaction, it won't be very much. But I think if you are much more willing to engage, willing to give, willing to talk, and to wait for a return, I think that you'll have a much better expectation or a much better return on the time that you do get to spend. And I think the third thing is that you have to realize it's a process. You're not going to get on Facebook and have 5,000 friends in a month or two. And I think there are services out there that will make that sort of thing a reality, but I think what I've read and what I've seen is that those followers are not going to be engaged in the things you say. They're not going to retweet and repost and comment on the things that you put on out there in the Twitter.
Yeah, there's no quick way to 1 million followers. You can't buy that.
Exactly. So I think you'd be better off with the 1,000 that really know who you are and what you're doing and really want to engage with it.
Right. Well, thank you very much for sitting on the media panel for the Ideas Are Worthless conference. Thank you for sitting here with us at Root TV. You can find Howard at iRun Campaigns on Twitter. You can find BlackFounders at BlackFounders, and you can follow this conversation with the hashtag Ideas Are Worthless. So follow us and keep in touch.